Elias found the satchel where the lane dipped toward the river, leather-torn, mail-sodden, a single stamp still clear on one envelope. Suspicion tightened his chest as he knelt and sorted wet papers with careful fingers. He had seen torn bags before. He had not seen a stamp that recent in the mud. The immediate problem was visible and simple. Someone had been stopped, and the route had already been broken. Elias ran a thumb along the edge of a letter and felt the small stiffness of fresh glue. He stood, listening for a hoof or a shout, and chose a direction toward the inn. Elias Cartwright rode that lane every fortnight, and his life had settled into straightforward habits. Start before dawn, mark the mileposts, count the satchels, nod at the postmistress. He lived alone in a lean room above the stable, and he kept a brass watch wound to the same rhythm as the post. He moved now with the same economy he used for his deliveries, hands working, eyes cataloging, decisions made quickly. The suspicion that had tightened his chest shifted into a quiet resolve. If one satchel failed, he would find why. If riders turned back, he would not. He reached Tom Reed's inn with mud on his boots. The common room smelled of stew and wet wool. A few men looked up from tankards. Elias set the soggy letters on a table. He said, "There's been trouble upstream." Tom Reed left his stool and stepped close. "Elias." "Tom, what did you find?" "A satchel ripped open by the milepost." Elias answered, letters scattered, one stamp fresh. "No rider." Tom's face tightened. "Jonas never came back last week." His voice went low, people's horses skittish. Folks turned back at the bridge. Elias thanked him with a nod and pressed for detail. Tom offered what he had. A rumor about a broken plank, someone shouting on the far bank, a shadow across the river. The information landed not as certainty but as pressure. Doubt moved across Elias' thoughts. Could this be an accident, or something deliberate? He folded the wet letters into his satchel and left a coin on the table. At the post office, Mrs. Harrow sat with the door half closed and a lamp burning low. She recognized Elias before he spoke. She had the habit of watching the road as if the parcels themselves might return with news. Elias laid out the torn satchel and the damp letters on the counter. He expected anger or precise bureaucratic worry. Harrow's hands trembled once as she closed the ledger. "Elias," she said, naming him the way she named anyone who might carry a problem. "Riders are turning back. I closed the North Road yesterday." "Why, Mrs. Harrow?" "Elias, someone waits at the bridge," she answered. "They do not take letters. They push riders off or stop them before the crossing. I thought it rumor. Now I think it design." Elias felt a new emotional shift. The earlier resolve had narrowed into caution. He folded the packet. "Mrs." Harrow pressed into his hands. "Try this one," she said. "It is sealed. It must go if you can do the last upstream run." "I'll try, Elias." He tucked the sealed packet beneath the flap of his satchel. "Mrs." Harrow locked the office, placed the key into his palm, and closed her mouth as if speaking further would break something fragile. He rode through the hamlet beneath a lantern light. A shutter banged once as he passed. At a cottage, a child stood on the step, clutching an envelope to her chest. Elias dismounted before he realized he had slowed. The girl's name was Ada Langley. He had delivered bread and small news to her mother before. Ada's hands trembled in the lamp glow. "Ada." Elias bending to meet her. "Where did this come from?" Ada looked at him without answering. He saw the envelope was fresh, no return address, her name written in a looping hand. The sight shifted his fear into a sharper urgency. The problem was not only about missed riders. The failure of the route had a face now. Someone at the other end of those letters had expected them to arrive. Elias left the satchel with Ada for a moment, then rode on. He followed fresh hoofprints that ran toward the river, closer to the broken bridge. The prints ended at a smear of blood and a scrap of leather. He dismounted, tightened his gloves, and moved along the bank. The river thudded against the ruined timbers with the sound of old wood failing. At the river bank, beneath the half-collapsed bridge, Jonas Graves lay wedged between two beams. He was alive, breathing shallow, with a torn sleeve and a pale face. Elias set down his satchel and crouched. "Jonas, can you hear me?" he asked. Jonas coughed and blinked. "Elias," he rasped. "They came from the far side, masks on. We heard shouting." "Who?" Elias demanded, voice flat with controlled alarm. Jonas's jaw worked. I don't know names, they knew riders' times. They stood on those planks like a gate. They shoved me. I fell. I heard a whistle. Then they were gone. Elias felt fear arrive as a physical thing, a tensing in his shoulders and a quickness beneath his ribs. He checked Jonas for broken bones, pressed a hand to the man's chest to listen to the shallow breaths. The suspicion that had started the night became a specific fear. Someone was stopping the mail on purpose. They worked in silence for a moment, hands busy with splints and cloth. Jonas tried to speak again, each word small and effortful. They took a packet I carried. Jonas, stamped for the governor's house. They tore it open. There's a name on the ledger I didn't get. Elias pinned that detail in his mind. A new shift moved through him. From fear to strategy. If the attackers targeted certain letters or certain destinations, there was motive and pattern. He made a plan to carry Jonas back to the village slowly, and to hold the sealed packet he had been given tight. On the broken bridge, Elias paused. Moonlight cut between broken planks and water. He heard movement across the span, feet on wood that still held. A figure stepped out of the dark on the far bank. Masked faces appeared, low voices like someone counting the ticks of a clock. The world narrowed to the brittle sound of boards, and the way the lantern shook in Elias' hand. Stay back. One of the masked men shouted. Drop the packet. Elias's hands were on the satchel strap before he answered. Jonas is hurt. We want to cross on these planks. Take what you want. Leave the injured. A man laughed. You think you will bargain. The voice came from the mask at the center. Metal clinked. The tone was thin and certain. Elias stepped onto the bridge with measured weight, testing planks as he went. He had to choose quickly. Cross the bridge and risk collapse, or hand over the packet and leave a promise undelivered. He felt the emotion that led him now, responsibility, press at him. That was the third emotional shift. Suspicion into resolve into a duty that made his limbs move. He judged distance, the position of the masked men, the angle of the wind. Jonas's breath hitched behind him. The nearest plank groaned. Elias reached the center where a broken beam exposed river beneath. One masked figure stepped forward and raised a hand. They argued in short lines. Elias, Jonas with pain. Don't cross Jonas. Elias replied, I want to lose you. Give it then. The masked man called. Give the packet. Elias looked at the sealed packet in his hand. The brass seal was tight. He could hear his watch ticking at his hip. He thought of Ada on a doorstep. He thought of Mrs. Harrow closing her ledger. He thought of the ledger item Jonas had said someone had seen torn open. He made a decision. He turned his body so that his shoulder faced the far bank. He slid the packet from his coat and held it out toward the masked man without stepping closer over the missing boards. Take it, Elias, but stay where you are. Leave Jonas. The masked man hesitated. A rapid exchange passed between men on the far bank in low voices. Someone swore, someone spat. The pauses lengthened like strained rope. Elias felt the fear return as cold in his palms. From the corner of his eye he saw one figure shift, a second step forward. Wood cracked behind him with a sound like a snapped violin string. At that instant, a shout split the air from the near bank. Tom Reed ran from the shadow of the lane with a lantern held high. Back! Tom shouted. Back where you came from! The masked men spun. One of them flung something that struck the lantern and sent a shower of light across the water. The sudden noise and the sudden light changed the moment. A small scrabble of movement on the far bank. The masked men backed away, then ran. A whistle sounded sharp and clear, and then nothing but the river. Elias moved to Jonas and fell to his knees. He had not crossed the broken planks. He had not handed over the packet. The choice felt like a narrow victory and a near miss. Jonas gave a grim little laugh and coughed. You an idiot, Elias, he muttered, then winced. Tom crouched beside them, breathing hard. Tom, Elias, once he could speak. Why are you out here? Tom's voice was flat. I saw lights on the far bank. I thought to drive them off. I couldn't tell if they were men or foxes. I ran, you ran and saved them from the bridge, Jonas. He spoke with a tenderness that undercut his pain. The exchange moved the scene from pure danger into human reckoning. Elias felt relief, a small, precise relief, but it sat next to a new pressure. The packet was still in his possession. The route was not safe. They carried Jonas back, 2 men supporting his weight. The village square still slept under a low fog. Mrs. Harrow had tied a bandage and sat on a crate waiting with a pot of hot water. Her mouth was set. "You kept the packet?" she asked as they arrived. Elias set Jonas down gently and put the sealed packet on the counter. "I did," he said. "They tried to force it from me." "We held." Mrs. Harrow opened the packet only enough to read a single line. Her fingers trembled. She looked up, not at Elias but at the ledger on the shelf. It was addressed to the upstream manse. She said, "A matter of the steward's account. If that is being intercepted, this becomes more than robbery." Elias heard the words and felt a shift again from immediate danger to broader consequence. The attackers were not merely vagabonds. Someone aimed to control who received which papers. The fear now carried the shape of possible politics. Threats that might shut down not only mail but news and trust. They argued quietly about what to do. "Mrs. Harrow, we can post a notice. Tom, tell riders not to go. Close the north, close the north." "Elias, if we close the north, Ada's let us stop. Ada will understand. Tom, safety first." Elias' answer was quick. "Ada won't understand." He set his jaw. "Ada will wait. Ada will expect the parcel to come." Tom stared at him. "You think you can keep doing the runs?" "Tom." The conversation tightened like a rope. This was the confrontation the chapter had been building toward. Practical choices clashing with human duty. Mrs. Harrow stepped between them. "No more runs until we can secure the bridge," she said. "No more risk. We will send word to the magistrate tomorrow. We can wait." Mrs. Harrow. "Elias, not for every letter. Not for Ada." He left the post office with a single yellowed envelope in his pocket and rode to Ada's cottage in the pale hour before dawn. Ada stood at the door as she had at night, but now her eyes were dry and tired. He put the envelope on the windowsill with a careful hand and did not knock. Ada found the envelope at sunrise and opened it in the kitchen light. Elias watched from the lane, distant and still as he waited for any sign of trouble. She read the few lines inside, hands steady, and then looked up toward the road where Elias stood. She mouthed his name and tapped the letter to her heart. The small exchange settled him in a way the evening-est noise had not. The emotion that had guided his choices that night, responsibility for a fragile chain of human contacts, steadied him. By dawn, the village had rallied. The magistrate's rider would arrive by noon. Men with ropes and nails planned repairs to the bridge. Mrs. Harrow kept the ledger open and catalogued every parcel known to be waiting upstream. Jonas recovered enough to speak. He named times and peculiar habits of the attackers. A whistle used to coordinate, a preference for the governess papers, a care to leave injured men alive. Each detail tightened the sense that the matter would not be easily resolved. Elias rode away from the lane with a slow, even gait. He had not solved the broader problem. He had preserved one packet and left a letter for a child. He had guided an injured man to safety. Those acts were small and concrete. They did not fix the bridge or stop the masks. They did not answer who had learned riders' schedules or why certain papers were taken. He kept his eyes on the next milepost and on the brass watch at his hip. The emotional arc of the night had moved from suspicion to resolve, from resolve to fear, and then from fear into a stubborn duty that mixed relief with new worry. Each shift had been visible in his fingers, in the way he paused to listen, in the decisions he made aloud. As the lane faded behind him, he thought of the packet still on Mrs. Harrow's counter and the ledger pages she had turned. He thought of Tom hollering into the dark and of Jonas' pale face. He thought of Ada holding the letter to her chest. The night's events tied themselves into a list of names and immediate needs rather than into any abstract sorrow. Elias rode on with the weight of that list. He would return on the morrow to help with repairs. He would watch the bridge until the magistrate's men arrived. He would not promise that the mail would always cross. He could only promise he would come when someone needed him. He rode past the lane where the satchel had lain and felt the quiet that followed a storm. At the lane's exit he slowed, checked the strap of his satchel, and felt the brass chain of his watch against his palm. He tightened the strap and set his jaw. He did not speak into the empty air. He rode forward, leaving behind the lighted window where Ada had sat with the letter on her lap. The last thing he saw before the lane turned was the pale envelope on the windowsill, catching the weak firelight. He rode away with that single image fixed in his mind. A concrete sign that one small thread of connection had been preserved, even while the road itself waited to be repaired. Elias slammed the torn satchel onto the counter. Sodden letters fanned under the lamplight, and one fresh stamp caught the glow. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he pushed wet paper aside with blunt fingers. "How is this still moving?" Elias demanded, the question sharp in the prayer. Dawn hush. Postmaster Reed scrubbed his hands over his coat and did not meet Elias' eyes. The room smelled of damp wool and boiled tea. The ledger on the shelf had a smear of mud at its edge, where the satchel had torn through a lane gutter the night before. He had found the satchel where the lane dipped toward the river, and a broken bridge waited, leather split, mail sodden, and a single clear stamp in the mud. That discovery from 2 nights past sat in Elias's memory now as a physical fact. The bridge had failed, the road had been marked closed in the ledger, and yet here was new postage. The suspicion something deliberate, not mere loss, moved him. He did not say the word again. He set the letters down and began to sort. Elias, Reed, voice low, "You shouldn't have brought that here like a charge against the office." Reed's fingers opened the ledger where names were scratched out with a quick, blunt stroke. "We marked the route suspended weeks ago. Private arrangements have been made for necessary parcels." Elias did not lower his hand. "Reed, the stamp on this envelope is dated last week." He tapped the paper. "If the route is closed, who rode? Who collected this?" Reed's shoulders tightened. "Sometimes people pay outside channels. Farmers who can spare coin. A woman who want tea come to the town. Discretion. You know how it is." The line between suspicion and accusation shifted in Elias' chest. He had expected simple mismanagement. Instead, Reed's admission introduced willful secrecy. That shift made Elias set his jaw and speak with a different tone. "Name one of them." "Elias, name the carrier." Reed looked away. "You will not like what you hear." Elias. "We did what we thought right to keep folks connected." Maggie Halloway arrived while Elias still worked the papers. She carried an oilskin bundle and a worry that showed at the corners of her mouth. "People are saying letters vanish after they leave my cottage." She told Reed without greeting Elias first. "Mrs. Clary swears she sent a note to her brother, and then the clerk said he hadn't taken anything for that address." "Maggie, Elias, show me." She set her bundle down and unfolded a small, damp sheet. "This came to me last night. I thought I'd been dreaming of letters turned into fish scales until Thomas came with a sodden pile he found caught on the ferry ropes." She named Thomas Grieve. The ferryman, and Reed's face went a shade paler. An external fact arrived. Thomas Grieve filled the doorway with his rain, slick coat, holding a mass of letters bound with string, water dripping. He did not make a show of it. He set the bundle down and spoke quickly. "Found them on the ropes by the quay before dawn. Someone cut a sack loose and they washed in. I saw men last night pull sacks toward the quay, not toward the road." Elias's fingers froze above an envelope. The change from paperwork to physical interception moved the problem across town and up the river. He had assumed the ledger error meant clerical laziness. Thomas' witness turned that assumption into a possibility of theft. "Who took them?" "Elias Thomas." Thomas chewed his lip and named nothing. His eyes found Reed. "I saw 3 figures with a lantern. They didn't look like regular carriers. They steered toward the quay." That was the second emotional shift. Suspicion into a colder, sharper threat. Elias thought of the broken bridge, of the night where he had found the satchel at the river bank. The bridge and the satchel had been a practical problem. Now the same scene pointed at deliberate rerouting. He kept working. Elias pulled at the ledger, running a thumb through the shapes of names. One entry had been scratched almost clean. He found where ink had soaked and been scraped. Under the scrape, a fold of paper stuck between pages. He eased it free and opened a small envelope with a wax remnant. Inside, a single folded note named an address that no longer appeared in the delivery rolls. "Reed, alias Holding the note where the lamplight could read the cramped handwriting, "Why remove this name?" Reed's voice lost a layer of defense. Orders came from a deputy inspector. The route carried trouble. We were told to seal records and refer inquiries. We were also told to allow private passage for special cases. Payment covered the risk. That is all. Maggie's hands shook as she picked up a damp letter addressed to a vanished family. She read the line aloud because it had to be read. "If letters stop, meet us at the old boathouse. If you can bring proof." The note changed the course of Elias's decision. Up to then he had sought a ledger irregularity to correct. Now he held a plea folded into an envelope. Deliberate intimidation, perhaps, and someone arranging a fallback. He put the plea into his coat and felt the damp gather at the cloth. He could have left the matter to Reed. Reed had admitted a moral compromise. Instead, Elias set his hat and went to follow the path written in a single damp sentence. At the inn's back table, Elias spread wet letters one by one. He handled handwriting like old objects. He turned each name into a small, concrete life. Maggie sat close and pointed at addresses. "Mrs. Clary, the Thompsons. You know the Harrises. None of them are supposed to be on the rolls." Elias lifted a folded paper with a grease stain and read aloud, voice level, letting the words land as facts. "Harold Ashby. Riverside clerk." Maggie looked up, frown deepening. "Harold. He does odd ledger work for paid accounts near the quay. He's quiet. People trust him with lists." The suspicion shifted again, this time toward a named person. Elias felt a new uncertainty. Would Harold be protector or profiteer? The question tightened his hands into small motions. He could imagine Harold in both roles, and that doubt held him as he took course for the quay. On the way to the river, Elias stopped at Reed's desk and said plainly, "If you've paid a private carrier, tell me who. If you've asked someone to protect names, I need that name now." Reed hesitated, then gave a name Elias had heard in passing. "We hired a small carrier service. John Avery's boys. They ferry parcels to the small places when the main route won't go. They were meant only to collect payment." Elias' mouth set. He walked into the drizzle, the ledger scratchings and Maggie's plea heavy in his pocket. At the quay, the ferryman pointed toward the boathouse and the ropes where Thomas had found letters. "They pulled sacks that way last night. I cut them loose. I thought they were lost." Elias climbed the quay steps and found the boathouse door latched but not locked. He forced it open and a smell of damp timber greeted him. In the beam of his lantern, he saw stacks of letters bundled in a careless, deliberate heap. Papers lay sorted by hand into piles of names where no official address existed. A brass pocket watch gleamed where a brass button had been dropped. Harold Ashby stepped forward from a shadow between crates. "Harold." "Elias, why are these here?" Harold's hands were empty. He looked older than Elias had expected and wore a coat not unlike Reed's in tone. "Elias." "Harold," voice thin, "you shouldn't he be here?" Elias did not lower the lantern. "Why take them?" Harold swallowed and answered as a man balancing small, dangerous facts. "I keep them safe. People come to me because they fear being cut from lists. I take letters, hold them until someone pays or returns. Sometimes I wait for a sign." Elias' disbelief came out as a short line. "You call theft protection?" Harold's mouth tightened. He stepped forward and a small pile of envelopes shifted under his hand. "I keep names safe, Elias. Those names mean food and rent. If the ledger says you do not exist, you cannot collect. People pay me to hold proof until a friend can fetch them. I do not sell letters. I do not burn them. I hold them." That admission altered Elias's picture again. He had expected a straightforward thief or a clerk in pocketing coins. Instead, Harold claimed a guardian role. Elias' reaction, anger, then a brief, involuntary empathy played across his face. "Who pays you?" "Elias." Harold hesitated and then said Reed's name and added quietly, "Sometimes the families themselves. Sometimes a farmer who reads the letter and slips coin." At once Elias saw the ledger's scratched names and Reed's private arrangements as linked rather than separate. Reed had arranged private passage. Harold had turned that passage into a holding pen. The moral lines blurred. Who protected and who profited? Who betrayed and who shielded? Elias stepped closer and read a bundle label. One pile held letters marked for families who had been listed as removed. He opened one and read the first clear sentence: "If letters stop, meet at the old boathouse." The sentence hit with the force of fact. Someone had left precise instructions to gather if the official post failed. That was not proof of profit. It was a contingency written by someone who feared enforced silence. Harold put up his hands. "I did not mean harm. People me. I kept their letters until they could be confirmed. I kept them from being lost to the river." Elias' voice lost shape in a small outburst. "You kept them off the rolls and in your own chest. That's interference with the people's right to send and receive." Harold answered with a quick, practical line. "I saved them from being marked undeliverable. I gave names time." The argument tightened into a rapid exchange. Reed's compromise, Harold's actions, and Thomas' witness folded together into a knot Elias needed to untie. He for details. Who collected when sacks were taken, who received coin. Each answer produced a new fact and a new question. The conversation moved in short lines. When Elias pushed, Harold admitted to routing letters from the road to the quay when the bridge was broken and selling the holding service as a favor for a small fee. Maggie interrupted at one point, voice blunt. "Harold, Mrs. Clary says she arranged to have proof held for a week while her son came. He never came. Where did the paper go?" Harold's face went white and he bent to a bundle. He held a single envelope up as if in search of permission to speak. This one I could not return. It was taken from the pile in the night. I woke and the stack was lighter. I thought thieves. I thought I had been careless." That external event, a missing envelope from Harold's held cash, became a mid-chapter mini cliffhanger. Who had taken it? Why? The answer would reshape how Elias judged Harold. Elias' suspicion turned again into a pressing need. Find who had taken the letters and whether they had been used to silence. Elias decided then to press beyond accusation. He named choices aloud. "We can expose Harold to the inspector. We can lock the ledger and refuse private passage. Or we can trace the missing letters and return any proofs to those addresses." Reed leaned forward. "If you expose it, you will break many small lives that depend on secrecy." Maggie looked at Elias. "If you done more letters vanish." Elias felt the split in his chest. He had begun with suspicion and moved through doubt, anger, and a slow resolve that came from the weight of names. He chose action. "We trace the missing envelope. We notify families quietly and ask who paid. We find the men at the quay and who took sacks off course." They set tasks. Thomas would check ferry logs and report the exact time he cut loose sacks. Reed would search for payments in the ledger and note any names connected to the private carrier. Maggie would go to Mrs. Clary and ask whether she had sent a son or a neighbor. Harold would point to the crates where he kept receipts and list the people who had left letters with him. Each person now had a role and a choice. Outside, rain picked up. Elias left the boathouse carrying a single rescued letter under his coat, a physical object he had chosen to keep rather than hand to official channels. He kept it for Mrs. Clary until he could find her son. The decision was concrete. One letter, one life, one attempt to keep a fragile thread intact. He did not vow grand things. He tightened the leather strap on his satchel and walked back toward the town with the letter pressing damp against his palm. That final action marked a closing beat. The immediate conflict intercepted mail had a local resolution. Harold admitted to holding letters for a fee. Reed admitted to arranging private carriage. Thomas witnessed sacks move toward the quay. And Maggie had a plea folded into wet paper. They had discovered a missing envelope and chosen a plan to trace payments and restore proof to families. Elias's choice to carry a single letter forward tied him directly to the people harmed. The chapter closed on him stepping into the lane, the letter inside his coat, and the knowledge that tracing the missing envelope might deliver both answers and danger. He walked past the tilted street lamp and kept the lantern low. Rain struck the brim of his cap in steady taps. He moved with the same careful pace that guided him when roots were whole. The night ahead had fewer certainties but a clear action. Find who had taken what, and whether the stolen correspondence had been used to erase names from lives. Elias felt the city asleep around him, not in fog or metaphor, but as closed doors, the hush of shutters, and the distant creak of a quay rope. He tightened his grip on the rescued letter and stepped into the road. The chapter ends with Elias turning the corner toward the inn, the single envelope warm with the heat of human urgency and damp from the river. He did not speak. He placed the letter in his inner pocket and buttoned his coat. A carriage rolled by, splashing the gutter. The sound cut the quiet and left him moving forward toward the next decision. He shoved a damp envelope through the gap in the shutter and heard a soft glove close around it at the other side of the glass. Suspicion sat with Elias like a weight in his chest from that first touch. He had felt it the night he found the satchel half buried by the broken bridge, when the stamp in the mud still read a clear date. He had felt it again when he slammed the sodden letters down under the lamp at Reed's sorting table and asked how fresh mail could still be moving. Now under the crooked window of Mrs. Halloway's cottage, that suspicion told him someone expected this particular letter. He kept his lantern low and his hands steady. Elias stepped back from the shutter and watched a pale face at the glass hold the paper like proof. Mrs. Halloway's fingers trembled as she opened the sasha hair and drew the letter in. She did not speak. She did not close the sash. Elias heard the river at his left and boots making small, wet prints on the lane behind him. He knew the stakes before he spoke. Mrs. Halloway, Elias, voice low and measured. This should not have been held. Mrs. Halloway pressed the envelope to her chest and met his eyes. Elias, she said, you brought it. You always bring what I cannot get to myself. Her tone made Elias narrow his eyes. Doubt, quick and cold, replaced the first suspicion. He, who else knew to wait? She looked past him toward the river. People wait when someone keeps the letters back. The window closed like a drawn breath. Elias set his lantern on the sill and ran a thumb along the envelope's edge. The paper tasted of damp and smoke. The seal, a rough wax disc, was whole. He had followed its trail through ruined leather and altered logs, and every small fact tugged him toward one conclusion. Someone in town had been choosing which messages reached their recipients. He left the cottage without a formal farewell. The morning had not yet decided to brighten. Mist lay between the lamplights and ripples on the river moved like slow fingernails. Elias walked the lane back to the post office with the sealed letter folded against his chest. Each step made his jaw set harder. At the sorting room, Postmaster Reed kept the lamp low and his hands busy with the ledger. Reed's face usually read like a closed book. Tonight it was tighter. Elias dumped the torn satchel on the counter and pushed the wax-sealed letter into view. How is this still moving? Elias, blunt and short. The suspicion showed in the set of his shoulders. Reed's fingers hesitated over a blot of ink and then moved to shut the ledger. You know the roads, Reed. Trail slips happen. Weather plays tricks. Elias touched the single stamp that had been clear in the mud the night he found the satchel. He kept his voice calm but hard. Someone altered the logs. Reed met his eyes for the first time. We keep order here, Elias. The town has needs beyond a straight line of delivery. That answer did not satisfy Elias. Doubt became a quick flare of anger. He tore open a ledger page Reed tried to close and found neat erasures where dates should have been. Someone had shifted entries and added a handful of names without crosses. Elias pointed with the silk knife. Postmaster Reed, these are changed. Who signed for these? Reed made a small, brittle sound. Names, yes. Some letters were marked to be withheld. Inspector Bram gave the orders. He thought it best. The name landed like a blow. Constable Bram had authority and a wide, blunt face that made people look away. Elias pictured the token he had found tucked between soaked wrappers in the torn satchel, the brass disc stamped with the constable's insignia. That object had seemed out of place on the riverbank. Now it fit into an ugly possibility. Elias left before Reed could explain more. He needed to see Bram. He needed to see the token against Bram's vest and hear Bram say the words himself. Anger had sharpened into resolve. The bridge was narrower than Elias remembered. It leaned at one side where a piling had rotted through. He had first found the satchel where the lane dipped toward this river. Now, at dawn mist, He saw Bram standing with his back to the water and Mrs. Halloway close beside him, her face flushed and tight. Bram's voice cut into the hush. "You shouldn't be here, Elias. The road is not for you this morning." Elias set his lantern down and showed the token between thumb and forefinger. "You left this on the riverbank. Why did you touch our mail?" Bram's jaw hardened. "We take measures we think necessary. You don't understand the things we guard." Mrs. Halloway stepped forward. Her hands clasped a shawl. "Constable Bram is right in a way," she said. "Not all letters are harmless. I would ask you to consider that." Elias's chest tightened. The suspicion that had opened this morning hardened into a new, bitter clarity. If Bram intercepted letters to protect the town, he had chosen which private things would remain private at the cost of other people's as knowledge. "Mrs. Halloway." Elias, and his voice went flat. "You took this letter. Did Bram tell you to?" She looked at Bram and then away. Some truth set people against each other. Elias. Bram thought it would stop worse things. Bram's mouth opened. "Exactly. You would let certain news undo the town like a loose stitch." Elias felt another shift from anger to cold calculation. He looked at the river, at the broken boards, and at the satchel that had turned up on the bank. He did not shout. He started naming facts. "You pulled mail, Bram. You logged nothing of it. Reed changed the ledgers later. The token in the satchel is yours. You kept the wax seal back in your shed. You admitted it to me at the bridge." Bram reddened. "You remaking accusations you can prove." At that, Elias stepped closer. "You left letters in your shed, Bram. You can deny orders, but you cannot deny the pile in your hands." Something small and sharp happened then. Mrs. Halloway put her hand on Bram's arm, hard and pleading. "Don't make this worse, Bram." Elias took the shed key from the constable's belt before Bram could move. He punished a laugh that wanted to leave his throat and went to Bram's shed. The padlock had been recently oiled. The door gave beneath his hand. Inside, under crates of rope and barrels, a tied bundle waited. Elias cut the twine with the silk knife and unfolded letters by lamplight. The papers smelled of dust and tobacco. He saw names he recognized. He saw one wax seal he had traced since the mud. He read, one after another, small lines of private grief and simple requests, and one blunt accusation that would have broken a household if read aloud. Bram's voice was low and raw when he spoke from the doorway. "We chose to hold some things back. We kept the town from tearing itself apart." Elias did not look at Bram. He held a letter that named a concealed debt and a stitched marriage bargain. He slid it toward Bram on the table. "Mrs. Halloway me to deliver one of these." "Elias, she made me promise nothing. I promised to follow the trail." Bram moved like a man who had finally been seen. There are families, Elias. And there are people whose right to know you stole." He set the wax-sealed letter in his palm and felt the cold from the seal. "You decided who could live in ignorance." A yell broke across the morning when Bram lunged. He grabbed at Elias' wrist. Elias twisted and pulled back. The physical fight was brief and close. Mrs. Halloway cried out and Reed's step hit the shed floor like a second arrival. "Stop it!" Reed, and his voice cut both men. "Stop this now." The scuffle ended with Elias on his feet, the letter tucked into his coat. Bram's hand bore a scrape. Reed stood between them, hands open, ledger clutched under his arm like a shield. The argument had been swift and had produced one more fact. Bram had feared exposure. Elias left with the sealed letter in his coat and a new, furious tenderness for the fragile right of a person to their own news. He moved quickly now, not to cause more harm but to repair one wrong he could fix. He thought of the figure at the window, of the longed-for letter in a clenched hand. His steps carried him toward the recipient's house, where the outline of a curtain showed a single dim hearth. He came at morning gray, boots hard on wet cobbles. The windowsill was empty when he put the letter down, then a hand reached out and drew it in. And a woman's shoulders sagged as she held the paper to her face. She did not speak. The sound she made was not a word, it was a release. Elias stood a yard away and watched her read. He could see the stamp, the handwriting he had traced for 2 nights, the wax seal breaking under her thumb. Where other people had withheld knowledge to hold order, one letter mended a small fracture in a life. Elias felt one more shift. The anger that had driven him eased into a steady, tired relief. Delivering this single message did not undo everything Bram had done, but it returned one thread of a longer repair. On his way back to the post office, Elias paused at the broken bridge. He looked down at the river and remembered the torn satchel and the muddy stamp. He had followed a trail of paper and brass to a place where men had thought they could keep peace by hiding truth. He had found Reed's erasures and Bram's cash, and he had chosen to deliver the sealed letter despite the constable's warning. Back at the post office, Elias set the roller lamp on the counter and wrote a short note. The paper was coarse. He wrote in his slow hand, "Route closed. I delivered what I chose to deliver. The rest I leave for town to decide." He folded the note and left it where Postmaster Reed would find it on returning from town. Reed arrived while Elias was packing the satchel's remnants into a box. He read the note at the counter and folded it into his palm. "Elias, Reed, voice low, you can walk away from every cost." Elias tucked the brass whistle into his palm and felt its familiar cool weight. He had used it for decades to call men, to mark a delivery, to warn. He had thought of the whistle as part of the route's work. Now it felt like the hinge on his choice. "I am closing the route, Elias." He did not ask Reed to agree. He did not ask Bram to forgive him. He put the sealed satchel into a crate marked for storage and set the whistle on the crate's rim before letting it drop into his pocket. Reed stared at the whistle and then out the window where the lamplight cut the fog. He folded his hands. "Elias, what will you say if the town asks why you broke orders?" Elias pressed the brass into his palm and swallowed. "I'll show them this letter was given back. I'll show them that shielding people from their own letters is a decision that costs more than it saves." Reed's face shifted. He did not smile. He did not make a sound of approval either. He set the ledger down and, finally, he crossed to Elias and put his hand on the counter. "Then leave a note on the desk explaining what you did, Reed, not in accusation, but in fact. Let the town decide." Elias nodded. He wrote what he had found, who had been involved, and what he had done. He described the token, the altered logs, Bram's cash, and the single delivered letter. He left out anger and left in the concrete steps he had taken. He sealed the envelope and placed it beneath the ledger for anyone to read who wanted the facts. Before Elias stepped back into the lane, he turned the brass whistle on its chain and placed it in his pocket. He did not need to blow it. He had made his choice and carried the evidence. Mrs. Halloway came to the post office that afternoon. She did not ask for Elias by name. She stepped inside and was still holding the opened letter. She met Elias' eyes and touched the sleeve of his coat. "You brought it," she said. "You always bring what I cannot reach." Elias' mouth tightened. "No one should choose that for you, Mrs. Halloway, not Bram, not Reed, not me." She looked at him with a tired understanding. "I know. But you brought the thing I needed. Perhaps the town will do what is right now." Elias stood on the post office step afterward and watched the envelope glow faintly against her hearth through the street. He folded his hands into his coat pockets and felt the whistle a cool metal press into his palm. He had closed a route he had once promised to ride to the end. He had delivered the last letter he chose to deliver. He set the post office door to rights, slid the latch, and let the step creak. He left his note where anyone could find it. He left the satchel's broken leather and the tokens as brass in a crate behind the counter for Reed's eyes and the town's decisions. Outside, the lane smelled of river and wet straw. The town would argue about who had the right to hold a letter. Elias did not ask for thanks. He had no appetite for praise. He tightened his gloves, tucked the whistle deeper, and walked toward the bridge to where the boards had rotted. He stopped at the edge, looked down at the water, and then turned away. He walked on, boots making soft, practical sounds on cobbles, choosing the next path for no applause, but because it was the only honest step he could take. He kept the wax-sealed letter's memory folded into his coat like a small, warm stone and let the town decide what to do with truth. Outside the post office window, the lamp flame moved and the letter's paper lifted with the draft from a door. Elias walked until the lane narrowed, Then he paused and set his hand on the brass whistle. He did not blow. He folded his fingers around the metal and stepped into the morning mist.